Exodus 20, verses 1 through 6. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or is in the water underneath. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to those who love me and keep my commandments. Welcome, Tales of Glory listeners, to the big episode 135. I'd like to welcome back our two listeners and a dog. I am your host, Reverend Michael, the M16 Bishop. And I'd like to thank all you listeners out there. Actually, it's interesting. We have a interesting community out there. Unless you get mad at me, you don't provide feedback. But if you want help, rather than leaving comments, I get these little emails off the side. Hey, I've been listening to your podcast. Like, well, who are you? And I understand you understand this stuff, but please help me. But sometimes it's helpful for you guys to just leave feedback too. It's just, it's what's going on. I'm not knocking you guys. I think it's kind of interesting. It's interesting the different audience we have too, right? When looking for help, we don't put it out in a commentary. It's like, hey, Mike, psst, can you help me with this? But I kind of like the open questions. If you can reformat it to it's not personal, where I can address it on the show to help other people too. That'd be beneficial and helpful. So today we are returning to Exodus. I'm taking some time off from the interior castle, Fifth Mansions. I've been so bogged down in it doing research, which I enjoy and love, but I don't want to crank stuff out before it's time. So I had last episode 134, of course, we had our special guest Abby on discussing who she is and the research she's doing with stones and dirt. And that was pretty interesting stuff from her. And I thank her for being on the show. And like I said, a little hiatus from Interior Castle. It'll come back when it comes back. I am still working on it. That's the whole deal. And I had taxes going on, all this stuff in my side life right now. So I thought, well, as I've been studying my Hebrew and practicing my Hebrew writing, I've been going back into Exodus. And I kind of laid off Exodus for a while, because once we got out of chapter 20, we went into the weeds with all these laws. And I kind of thought I'd bore you to death with the different laws going on. And, we did some of that. And we did also, we're looking at, or I skipped over, was the tabernacles, the lengths of the ark, things like that. Kind of left it out because I thought I'd kind of bore you guys. But as I was studying my Hebrew and looking up words, I dove back into chapter 32. And I go, wow, this is a cool spot to jump back in. As I started understood Hebrew and started understood some of the words in their context, it started painting a picture of what was going on with the golden calf and who Aaron was. I think from the pulpit with those MDivs, we weren't getting the correct picture. It's like, oh, they made an idol and all this stuff, and shame on them and what they did. Well, shame on them for what they did. But I don't think the true motive for what Aaron did was actually presented. If you listen, I'm going to go throw Mark Driscoll under the bus right now. Well, that was Baal. That was definitely Baal. It was Baal. Oh, by golly, they were devil worshippers and Baal. Let's think about this. Who was Aaron? Aaron was the head guy, right? The headliner. He was the guy that, went out and did miracles for Moses when he was there in front of Pharaoh. And there is no shaking through what Aaron witnessed that Yahweh was God. So my conundrum and what I'm going to attempt to answer today is, was it Baal or was it something else? Was it something else going on that Aaron got in trouble for anyway, right? He wasn't supposed to create a graven image. That's why I opened with Exodus 20. And I believe Aaron went down the road of creating a graven image of God, and that's what ticked him off. But we also may have a mix of occult stuff too going on, because the other people jump in there going, yeah, we need to make a God we can see and worship, Well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's dive into this. This is what we're going to do. We're going to answer the question, did Aaron sin with creating a graven image of Yahweh, or did he sin by creating an idol of a god, another god? Let's address that, because this is pretty fascinating. So the incident we're diving into is chapter 32. Why did Aaron do this? Did we get the real story from the pulpit? I don't think we did. I think from the Sunday school teachings, just like Genesis 6, we didn't get the real story. We got the MDiv story. And the true story comes out when you start looking at textually what the Masoretic Hebrew was saying in the text. So let's find out what the heck is going on in chapter 32 and why did Aaron fabricate the golden calf? I think there's a totally different story than we were taught. And here we go. So I'll be referring to the textual commentary in Exodus from the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society Torah Commentary in Exodus by Nahum Sarna, 1991. I reached out and bought this back when I was going through Exodus and I was doing Tales of Glory way back when. I can't remember which was the last episode. We went off this for a while. We've been doing other things, but we're kind of returning. But I'm diving back into Sarna and the JPS Torah Commentary, and that's where I'm going to get all my comments from today. So we're using peer-reviewed material. We're not going off like an Instagram influencer going, oh, it was Baal because I'm enlightened and I know this stuff. It was definitely Baal, right? It's not the case. I don't think that's what the case is, and you guys are going to get edified in this. Oh my gosh, hold on. Here we go. So Nahum Sarna breaks down Exodus chapter 32 in the following components. He's going to break it up in different components. We go through chapter 32. I want you guys, I'm going to follow the same breakups of these things as we discuss this chapter. He has the making of the golden calf, verses 1 through 6. Then we deal with the situation of God's anger and Moses' intercession in verses 7 through 14. We have Moses smashes the tablets and destroys the golden calf in verses 15 through 20. We have Aaron's Apologia, verses 21 through 24. We have the selection of the Levites in verses 25 through 29. And then we have Moses' second intercession in verses 30 through 34. The scriptural setup for Exodus 32 is actually found back in Exodus 24:18, where Moses was on Mount Sinai with Yahweh for 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 18, Moses entered the cloud and went up the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, as we look at the Bible, it all hyperlinks. There was no New Testament when Jesus was around, so when Mark and Matthew and Luke and Paul all were writing the New Testament, they were hyperlinking their thoughts back to the Old Testament. If you look at Luke 4, where Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, he fasted, just like Moses did. And then he went up to the mountain to meet who? He didn't go up to the mountain. Remember, Satan provided the mountain. Well, come on up here to this high place. Let's talk. Jesus was reliving all the failures of the Israelites here, what's going on right now. But Jesus didn't fail this time around. So I want you to look how this hyperbolically links back and forth, because this is important because it resurfaces back in Luke 4. So meanwhile, I don't want to drift here. I don't want to get to that, but look at the similarities as you go after this. Maybe go read that afterwards when we're done talking about this. So again, Exodus 24, verse 18, Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So he kind of disappeared for a while. He left the people back down at the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So let's go into the first section, verses 1 through 6, that Sarna identified as the making of the golden calf. And let's read those verse 6 verses. Verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Verse 2, So Aaron said to them, Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who I brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." Very important right there. Tomorrow should be a feast to the Lord. What the heck is going on? And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So we are on Logo Software. We're looking at the JPS on Torah on the commentary on Exodus, and we're at Exodus 32 right now. And so Sarna identifies this as the violation of the covenant, the golden calf. The account of the tabernacle is interrupted by the story of making of worship of a golden calf. This episode separates a detailed set of instructions from the report of their implementation. The literary arrangement conveys the impression that the apostasy of the people, that is, the alienation from God, interfered with the building of the intended sanctuary that was to be the tent of meeting between God and Israel. That work could begin only after reconciliation through the mediation of Moses. So let's look at this thing. What is going on? So verse 1, this verse is intelligible only in reference to 24:18, which I read earlier, which told of Moses' ascent of the cloud-enveloped mountain and of his seclusion 30 days and 40 nights, because Moses had now until fulfilled the role of exclusive mediator between God and Israel. At the urgent request of the people, as told in 20:15 through 18, his protracted absence generates deep anxiety and mood exacerbated by the awareness of the impending departure from Sinai. So it's interesting. So Sarna makes a point that the people gathered against Aaron. In other words, it was an unruly mob. Sarna quotes, there's Nikal al is the Hebrew word. I didn't find it here in Exodus, but I believe he pointed out it turned up in Numbers with restating the story. And it comments as they gathered against Aaron. So in other words, it was an angry mob. Hey, that Moses has been up in the hill 40 days and 40 nights. We don't think he's coming back. So where's God at? We need to fashion a God we can access. So in other words, they were going to build a golden calf that was supposed to house Yahweh, and something they could summon and bring Yahweh back. So make us a god, something that is emblematic of an eminent divinity. Rashbaum suggests that they had in mind some instrument for determining the divine will be a replacement for Moses, the absent human medium of divine revelation. So if Moses disappeared, we're going to build this golden calf, which is going to be a representation that when we go to connect with Yahweh, he will manifest or come through this golden calf we've created. So it wasn't Baal. We're not leaning on Baal. We're looking at the contextual information of what's in this text. And then it referred to that man Moses, disrespectful of speaking in the manner. And that man Moses disappeared up on the hill, who brought us from here, now abandoned us. He brought us and delivered us out of Egypt, now abandoned us. We'll look at verse 3, gold rings. Gold rings, man. These may have been among the items the Israelites received from the neighbors when they left Egypt, right? As related in Exodus 11, 2 through 3, and 12, 35 through 36. From the story in Genesis 35, 4, where earrings are coupled with alien gods and are ritually buried with them. It is clear that they are not mere adornments, but also some cultic significance. The conclusion is reinforced by a narrative about Gideon in Judges, verses 8, 24 to 27. He too specifically requested gold earrings and manufactured them from an ephod, after which Israel went astray, and which became a snare to Gideon and his household. So let's drop down here to the calf. Calf, Hebrew, egel, is a young ox or bull. Psalm 106, 19 through 20, in reference to this episode, alternates egel with shor, or ox. So they've gone back and forth between Psalm 106 and here, whether it was a golden ox or a golden bull. Let's go on. Throughout the Near East, the bull was a symbol of lordship, leadership, strength, vital energy, and fertility. As such, it was either deified and worshipped or employed in representation of divinity. So we're going back to ancient Near East religion, right? So if they were going to depict Yahweh, who they haven't seen, who's invisible, I mean, even Moses met to Yahweh face to face, but didn't see his face. So they don't have any idea, other than from a burning bush, of what Yahweh looks like. So their culture and tradition was, well, let's make Yahweh a bull. It represents fertility, it represents strength. That's a good idea. Let's go with that. So it wasn't necessarily Baal. Getting this here? A lot of influencers right now on Instagram stuff. Like I said, Mark Driscoll's one saying, it was Baal. They're worshiping Baal. They weren't. They screwed up. The particular animal might be suggestive as the attributes ascribed to the god who was mounted upon it. Aaron seems to have followed contemporary artistic convention. The young bull would have been a pedestal upon which the invisible God of Israel was popularly believed to be standing. His presence would be left to human imagination. The last interpretation is supported by the People's Association of Manufactured Image with the God who operates in history, not with some deity possessing mythological associations. It is strengthened by Aaron's proclamation in verse 5 that the following day would be a festival to the Lord, Yahweh. Right there's our evidence, right? That's kind of like our smoking gun. So we're going to have this golden bull, and supposedly it'll be an idol that Yahweh, we can communicate with him through or provoke Yahweh to come to us through. And we will have a festival in his honor to have him come manifest or come into this thing, or what they think is going to happen. So in other words, the people, in demanding a god because of Moses' disappearance, wanted an appropriate visible object that would recall the divine presence in their midst. It should be noted that in verse 8, the focus of the indictment is on making of a molten calf and not worshiping other gods. This is your God, Rashbam and other medieval Jewish commentators have pointed out that the people could not have been so stupid as to believe that this freshly manufactured image itself was a deity responsible for the exodus from Egypt. Rather, they felt the object was a potent symbol that acquired a numinous quality and that they could have invoked the deity through it, of Yahweh. It is to be noted that the demonstrative pronoun Elah and the verb governed by Elohim, God, are in the plural form, and that a plural verb is used in verses in 1 through 23. Plural forms with Elohim are found in monotheistic context several times in the Bible, and the plural usage may be a scribal device to emphasize the unacceptable nature of the object. So if we see Elohim relating to Yahweh, it's because the contextual writings of the scribes in the Masoretic Hebrew or the ancient Hebrew, they want us to see, hey, this was an unacceptable version or approach for displaying Yahweh. So he was called Elohim in this, right? So Aaron made only one image, and specifically Nehemiah in 9:18, and recall in this episode, has the cry of the people singular, "This Zeh is your God who you brought out of Egypt. Hey El Kala." So Aaron plays no further role. The rabble has taken over, and he has plunged into a pagan orgiastic rites. 5 verbs of action are employed to describe this popular behavior, and see comments in verses 19 through 20. All right. So let's move on to verses 7 through 14. Does this make sense now? We're leaning on. They were trying to make a graven image, which was a no-no. Weren't supposed to do that. To invoke the invisible God because they didn't know what happened to Moses. Did he disappear? Did he die somewhere? Now what are we going to do? We're stuck here. We're supposed to be moving on. We better make some sort of way that we can contact our God Yahweh. And that's where we're at with that. So let's move on to verses 7 through 14, God's anger and Moses' intercession. Verse 7, "And the Lord said to Moses, Go down, for your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves." Got that? God's calling them your people. Hey, your people are in trouble. Verse 8, "They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from disaster that he had spoken of bringing to his people. Let's look at the commentary. Verses 7 through 8. When the boisterous revelry had reached its height, God informs Moses of what is happening in the camp below. Verse 7. Your people, a strong intimation of the alienation from God, in contrast to my people, repeatedly employed hereto to divine speech, have acted basely. The calf, even only intended as a pedestal of the invisible God of Israel, was very much an image of a living entity. It would inevitably divert human attention to itself and away from the invisible one that was meant to invoke. The popular mind would regard this image pedestal as an object endowed with divinity. By putting God back into nature, the people violated and nullified the fundamental distinctive idea of the religion of Israel. Verse 8. To turn aside from my way. Significantly, the text does not say from me. They have adopted pagan modes of worship, but in worship of the God of Israel. See here with the commentaries, we're lining back to, they tried to build a graven image of God, which they didn't know what he looked like, so they built a bull, because that's what you did back in the ancient Near East religion when you want to, our God is strong. See, he's a bull, he has fertility, he's vital, he's powerful, he's strong. So it wasn't Baal. So verse 9, I see divine seeing as opposed to Aaron seeing in verse 5. This people, God sardonically turns on the people their disrespectful reference to Moses. Stiff-necked is a term, a frequent image of willful obstinacy derived from the farmer's experience with work animals. Verse 10, let me be. This phrase both intimates and anticipates intercession for Israel on the part of Moses. As such, it is a tacit comment on Moses' extraordinary character. At the same time, it implies that such intercession can be effective. Thus, it also a statement of the nature of God. He is responsive to human entreaty. Intercession before God on behalf of man is an indispensable aspect of the prophetic role. In fact, the first scriptural usage of the term Navi, prophet, appears in such a context in Genesis 27. Abimelech is told, since he, Abraham, is a prophet, he will intercede for you. Moses frequently acts as an intercessor, as do Samuel, Amos, and especially Jeremiah. So in this intercession mode too, what are we seeing here? We're seeing that Moses, who has some favor with Yahweh, is able to sway Yahweh in decision-making, almost like being a council member. Remember, we were torn from the council in Genesis 3, from our fall. But still, some people are in favor with him, such as Moses or other prophets that he bestowed Ruach Elohim, the Holy Spirit, on. He allows these guys to mediate with him. We've seen David do the same thing, right? So there's this thing where God is unswayable by man. No, we could sway God if we're in good favor with him and we're reason with him, and we could turn him from things. So that's why I know this is another Calvinism thing right here, right? We can interact with God. We can intercede and have things changed. A great nation. The phrase evokes the divine promises to the patriarch. This is seized by Moses, right? He says, well, we're a great nation. Didn't you promise us this? Let's scroll down here. Moses' petition rests on the following considerations. Israel is God's chosen people. God manifested his power in delivering Israel from Egypt. The destruction of Israel would diminish God's honor in the eyes of the Egyptians. Further, God made promises to the patriarchs. So verse 11, we have Moses' love of Israel such that he nobly and selflessly rejects God's offer to make his own descendants the sole heirs to the promises made to the patriarchs. The same characteristic is once again displayed in verse 32. We'll get to that. So verse 12 is interesting too, how Moses relates to Yahweh. So verse 12, the thrust of the events in Egypt was that the Egyptians might know the Lord. Remember, he demonstrated his power as being the omnipotent, preeminent, only true God, Yahweh. And so Moses said, well, hey, if we did this on them, and then he pulled his people out, Yahweh pulled his people out, that recognizes incompatibility. The theological impact of the events of Exodus would now be undone. Sensitivity, concern of God's reputation is a recurrent motif in the Bible. So this was important. Verse 13, the words remember, right? And verse 14, the Lord renounced Moses' intercession, succeeded in averting the threatened punishment. As the psalmist has it, he would have destroyed them not had Moses, his chosen one, confronted him in the breach to avert the destruction wrath of Yahweh. Let's go look at verses 15 through 20. Moses smashes the tablets. Good golly, Miss Molly, what is going on here? So now Moses is angry, right? At least should be. Left these people alone and they went off and did all this. Moses smashes the tablets and destroys the calf. Verse 15. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands. Tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and the back, they were written. Verse 16. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Verse 17, when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there was a noise of war in the camp. But he said, it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. Whoa, we heard that before, right? Yahweh's anger burned hot previously. Let's continue. And he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire and ground it in powder and scattered it to the water and made the people of Israel drink it. Verses 15 through 16, the description of tablets is germane to the present context. More appropriate belongs in 31:1-3. Okay, so they're saying it's out of order. That's all right. Raman suggests that it functions here to point up the strikingly audacious nature of Moses' action in smashing the precious objects. So verse 15, the comments are bearing the 2 tablets. Their size is not recorded here, but their maximum dimensions are determined by the size of the ark in which they were to repose. This was given in Exodus 25:10 as being 2.5 cubits in length, right? I don't want to get in the weeds here with dimensions and stuff because we had before, but they were designed to fit inside the ark. So verse 16, God's work, God's writing. This verse implies a statement in Exodus 24:12. Rashi observes that these descriptions may be taken either literally or figuratively. If the latter, they convey the idea that Torah is God's preoccupation. So verse 17, Joshua, he was stationed partway up the mountain between Moses, waiting for his return, as told in Exodus 24:13, that he could hear the rising din, but could not view the scene. So he heard singing or chattering that the war was going on or something, but he couldn't see. He was just pulled midway at the mountain, wait for Moses' return. Verse 18, but he answered, Moses has already been informed. Moses already knew what happened, right? Because God was angry. Verse 19 through 20, as he approaches the camp and personally witnesses the scene, Moses realizes the full extent of degradation and recognizes the enormity of the people's sin. So what did he do? He hurled the tablets. This was not an impetuous act, rather quite deliberately significant, the abrogation of the covenant. In Akkadian legal terminology, to break the tablet means to invalidate or repudiate a document or agreement. Moses is no longer the intercessor, but the decisive, energetic leader. His actions are recorded in a series of 10 verbs delivered in a quick succession. He broke it where? At the foot of the mountain where the people assembled. Those little camps were, right? They didn't go up the mountain. Verse 20, the same series of destructive acts is found in Ugaritic literature. It conveys a picture of total annihilation of a noxious object. This parallel suggests our narrative has been crafted in conformity with conventional literary terms. For this reason, it is hypocritical to question the burning and pulverizing of the golden calf on the grounds that the metal is neither combustible nor friable. The water, unidentified here, the water is characteristic in the duplicate account of Deuteronomy 9:21 as the brook that comes down from the mountain. This implies a single source of water for the entire camp, the idea being apparently that no individual could escape drinking the mixture. So he made the Israelites drink it. This move is seen as a trial by the ordeal modeled that is upon ministered to the Sotah, suspected adulteress, whose treatment is in Numbers 5:12 through 31. She was forced to drink the bitter water mingled with dust from the floor of the sanctuary. Support in this interpretation is a phrase, next verse, for the frequent use of unfaithful wife motif in biblical literature as a metaphor for Israel's infidelity with the covenant with God. The purpose of this ordeal was to identify the transgressors. Interesting. So we'll see here, and it doesn't happen until, I think, verse 35. We jump ahead where we'll come back to this. What happens when the people who are involved in making the idol or worshiping it, what happened to them when they drank this water? I want to pause here too, and if you're dealing with cursed objects, go back and look at verse 20 because it tells us how to destroy cursed idols and cursed objects. Break them up, destroy them, and throw them into running water. Right? There's something very significant there. That's how we destroy cursed objects. I shared a story some time back too. We had to deal with a Santa Morta statue and destroy it. And that's kind of what we did here. Except we didn't drink the water, right? We put it in flowing water and make sure it dispersed. So this brings us to verse 21 through 24. Let's dive back into here and see what this looks like. Aaron's Apologia. What is that? And Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, they are set on evil. For they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So I said to them, let any who have gold take it off. So they gave it to me and threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." So did it magically come out? Is there something, some idiom or context of speech we're not understanding because it's early Hebrew? Let's take a look at this. What's going on? So we have back from Logos and going back to Sarna, Moses breaks his silence. His questioning of Aaron is really a harsh rebuke. So verse 21, this people, see comment to verse 9. So great sin. There is a legal term found in documents from Ugarit and Egyptian marriage contracts always referring to adultery. The same usage appears in Abimelech's reproof of Abraham in Genesis 20, verse 9, which is couched in language almost identical to that used here. A reflex of it shows in Joseph's rebuff of Potiphar's wife in Genesis 39:9. There are 4 other biblical occurrences of the great sin, all reference to idolatry. So verse 22 through 24, Aaron excuses himself by vilifying the people. He repeats their words by abbreviates his own response to their demand and glosses over his own involvement in the fashion of the calf image. Verse 24, out came this calf. As though fabricated itself, Moses did not respond. In recounting the episode in Deuteronomy verses 9, 12 through 22, he ignores Aaron's excuse as though unworthy of consideration, and clearly states that the Lord was angry enough with Aaron to have him destroyed. Only by Moses' intercession was he saved. Wow. So remember, he was going to take out Aaron too on this one. He was mad at everybody. God was angry. It was idolatry with the sins and forming a graven image of God. Yikes, yikes, yikes. So let's look at selection of Levites, verses 25 through 29, chapter 32. Verse 25. And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose, to the derision of their enemies, then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered around him. And he said to them, "Thus says the Lord of Israel, put your sword on your side of each of you, and go to and fro among the gate to gate through the camp, and each of you kill this brother and his companion and his neighbor." I want to pause here. There's something interesting here. Remember he said, "Thus saith the Lord," right? Remember he's back up here, which verse, 27? And he said to them, "Thus saith the Lord of God of Israel, put your sword on your side." Where have we heard that before? We heard that in church all the time with these prophets standing up, "So saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord." Well, here it is in Hebrew. I have it highlighted in yellow up there, and it's read backwards. We'll be reading it from left to right. "Thus saith the Lord of God of Israel." But it's read from right to left. So we're going backwards in the Hebrew underneath. So it says Israel. We'll start that direction. We're reading over to the left. Israel, Elohim, Yahweh, Amar, Kia. So thus saith the Lord. That's it right there. That's where you see it, right? That's a Hebrew. That's where we get that from, guys. Exodus 32, verse 27. It may not be the first time. I think it shows up other places too. Let's continue reading. So verse 28, "And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and that day about 3,000 men of the people fell. And Moses said, Today you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and of his brother, so that may bestow a blessing upon you this day." Whoa, that one's intense. What's going on? Yeah, we definitely got to look at the commentaries for this one. What is going on there? The son or brother to the sword. Was that the punitive damages? Was that the capital punishment for this? Let's see. The destruction of the golden calf seems to have been triggered a riot among its worshippers. The Levites are called in, suppress it, and punish the guilty ones. So verse 25, out of control. The consonants of the Hebrew are pe, resh, I think it's yod, pare, are the same as those used in connection with sotah, the alleged adulteress in Numbers chapter 5, verse 18, which provides another point of association between the two themes. So adultery is a big theme that comes out of here. Aaron, out of control, an unequivocal rejection of Aaron's lame excuse and a condemnation of his actions. Menace, the unique Hebrew shimtsah, has usually been understood as an object of derision or a malignant joy. In Job 4:12 and 26:14, the masculine in shemetz means a whisper. It often offers no clue of the meaning here. In verse 26, whoever is for the Lord, the question implies that regardless of the intention of the worshippers of the calf, the use of an image is irreconcilable with the true monotheism. So all Levites, Moses' own tribe, they remain faithful to the covenant and loyally maintain the purity of Israel's worship. This note as a verse 29 in Deuteronomy, chapter 10, verse 8, implies intended to provide background for the election of the tribe of Levi to be in charge of the tabernacle and to be surrogates of the firstborn. It is quite likely the firstborn played a leading role in the worship of the golden calf, and for that reason were displaced as cultic officiants. Here we are, verse 27. Thus says the Lord. See comment 422. The solemn form is employed here to signify the assignment to Levites, extraordinary, that is beyond the purview of any human authority to impose. It cannot be taken as precedent for the future disposition of future cases. Right? Here's a word right here, slay brother. They must be absolutely impartial and even-handed in carrying out this grim task. It is likely that Moses' farewell blessing of Levi in Deuteronomy 33:9 refers to this episode. who said of his father and mother, I consider them not. His brothers he disregarded, ignored his own children. Your precepts alone they observed, and you kept your covenant. Dedicate yourselves on this idiom. Going back to Exodus 28:41. Okay, we're going to hop over to Moses' second intercession, verses 30 through 34. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here, right? This isn't the stuff that showed up in Sunday school, man. I'm sorry, I didn't see this in Sunday school. Get a little education here. Moses' second intercession, verses 30 through 34. Verse 30. The next day, Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin, and I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, alas, this people have sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you'll forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. But the Lord said to Moses, whoever sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. Let's check out our commentaries here. Here we go. Going on here. So the next days after the carnage, Moses goes up to Sinai. Verse 31 to 32. As we expect, the prayer blends confession with a plea for pardon. But another element is introduced. Moses nobly ties his personal destiny to his people's fate. There can be hardly a more impressive example of selfless love of Israel. Let's take a look at verse 32. Erase me from the record. This request seems to reflect a well-rooted and widespread Near Eastern popular belief in the existence of heavenly books. The Hebrew Bible differentiates these three types. There is the Book of Life, mentioned in Psalm 69, verse 28, in which God is thought to inscribe the names of all living. This notion undoubtedly drew his inspiration from civil census lists that were taken by municipal or state authorities. Then there is the Book of Divine Decrees, in which destinies of men and women and peoples are recorded. Lastly, there's a Book of Remembrance in Malachi, chapter 3, verse 16, in which the deeds of human beings, both good and evil, are written up. The last must have its origin in ancient court procedure. It is hard to decide whether or not the notion of heavenly books were taken literally in ancient Israel. Maimonides ambiguously emphasizes the figurative, non-literal nature of the biblical phraseology. The perennial Jewish greeting on the high holy days, may you be inscribed, echoes the ancient idea. In the present instance, Moses' request is framed in the figurative language of the Book of Life, so that he is really asking to die if Israel is not forgiven. In verses 33 to 34, God responds to Moses' entreaty. There must be individual accountability, but the people also bears collective responsibility. Divine promises of national territory to the people of Israel are immutable, but total absolute for the sin of the golden calf cannot be given. Israel receives a suspended sentence. The people are on probation. Again, verse 34, my angel. Let's look back at Exodus 23:20, right? I'll send my angel before you. That's one where it says he is one capable of redemption. We believe this to be Jesus. I believe that to be Jesus, in my opinion. Who is the one capable of forgiving and redemption? Is Jesus. Go back and look at that. We pull up here. Yeah, here we go. Exodus 23, verse 20. Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you out of the place that I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him, obey his voice, and do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you carefully obey his voice and do all I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies, an adversary to your adversaries. Who's that? Who is that, guys? I've had so many times when people under spiritual attack, like I said, I lost a friend who fell out of, her renounced her salvation because she said Jesus was in the Old Testament. He's right. He's all over the Old Testament. My God, pick it up. That's it right there. So, yep, that's where we left off at, guys. Let's just jump back in here. So verse 35, then the Lord sent a plague on the people because they made the calf, the one that Aaron made. We're going to get ahead of ourselves here, but I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. What was the plague? Recall they burnt the calf and they spread it in running water. It was a sign to find out who the idolaters were. Remember the stories we were talking about, the idolaters and the idolater wives? They drink the water and they got sick from it if they were guilty. Those who drank the water and they got sick from the golden calf, they're being identified. That's what the plague is. The Lord sent the plague on these people. And we'll get to that next time we cover this. We're diving back to some more interesting stuff. We can pick up Exodus some more here. But I absolutely love the book of Exodus. It's one of my favorites. The Old Testament. I'm all over the place, man. I mean, I'm getting excited here. We're approaching, Joshua? Right? Can't wait to get that too. We'll start dealing with the giants and stuff. There's a few here. We've encountered them. But the supernatural going on here and dealing with the occult, right? He was dealing with the occult in his own places here. So they tried to mimic what they learned from the Watchers. We got to build an idol. And God goes, that's what the Watchers do. Do not build an idol for me. Do not build a graven image of me. And they did. They got in trouble because they wanted to invoke the unseen God Yahweh because they thought Moses disappeared in the mountain or died in the mountain. He wasn't coming back. So we've seen the arguments. We've seen the peer-reviewed material that no, Mark Driscoll, this was not Baal. This was a graven image of supposed to be a powerful god of which they didn't know what he looked like. They thought the bull or the ox would represent him, a mighty looking creature, an animal, right? And that's what they did. They got in trouble. They got in trouble for idolatry, adultery, and all that good stuff, right? And graven image, man. This thing took out 3 different strikes against the people of Israel who participated. Conclusion. Was Aaron's sin creating a graven image of Yahweh? Yeah, it was. We saw it with 3 sins, right? Create a graven image. It was idolatry, and breaking the covenant like that was also adulterous. And so they created the water. They burnt the calf, right? Ground it up, dumped it in their drinking water, and those who were responsible for the adultery would get the plague. We'll see that coming up in Exodus 33. Heavy stuff, man. Heavy stuff. That's the end of it. Exodus 32. What we continue next time? We could be in Interior Castle, 5th Mansions, Chapter 2. I have most of that material presented. It's possible we're heading that way or wherever the Holy Spirit leads us. I want to give what's properly due for St. Teresa of Avila and the 5th Mansions. So if I'm slowing down it, I'm okay with that. I'm pretty sure it's coming up next. I got most material prepared, the slides prepared. But I want to make sure it's ready for prime time and ready to be released to the world here. So that could be next in the queue, or we could be doing chapter 33, or maybe we could do another, I don't know, whatever the Holy Spirit leads us to. I'm leaving it open for him. Let him run Tales of Glory. Cool stuff, man. And where we at? We're at Tuesday, March 4th, 2025 here. And I had a crazy thing last night. I was going to put it on Facebook. God goes, no, put it on Facebook. Cause I didn't know who would get it, who would understand it. But I'm in California and I thought there's some heavy territorial spirit or something out here. It just feels horrible. It's horrible. It's running, jamming stuff going on. So we're having a hard time connecting with God and all sorts of stuff. I feel like there's a chaos. I feel like there's an insanity spirit with it too, doing this. And it just is, it's like some sort of temper tantrum going on in California right now. But as I connect with other people I'm working with across the United States, they're picking up on it too. So I don't know what's going on. Some sort of retaliatory stuff. How do we deal with this? We don't fight in the spiritual realms. We just petition Jesus to protect us, protect our family, protect our animals, whatever's going on, protect our finances, protect our health, all that sort of stuff. And Jesus protect us, whatever this territorial spirit is, what this rebuttal looks like is going on. And just let it blow over us. Of course, these things were supposed to have been wiped out in Colossians 2:15, where he has them in chains. He does, but they have collateral damage they want right now. They haven't been facing judgment yet. Until that time, we're going to be seeing some nasty stuff between now and whenever that may be. So if you're feeling the weird monk, I call it the funk. It's thick. It's thick right now. I haven't felt it since COVID. It's very isolating. It stirs up the mind. It attacks the mind. You guys are feeling this because I'm not a person that feels sort of depression. I'm not a person that feels like I'm good at spiritual warfare. I'm looking, how to break stuff off and fight stuff. But this thing has just been like going through the bones and stuff. It's weird. there's something out there, some spiritual beings in the terrestrial level, Ephesians 6:12 level are throwing a temper tantrum or something's going on, so beware. Just pray how I said to pray, petition Jesus. Don't go out there and fight them. Don't go out there and take on the Queen of Heaven and all this stuff. Oh my God, I'm hearing that sort of garbage too. You will get wiped out. You will probably get a nasty plague. You will get something, a sickness, an illness. Your finances wiped out, something. Do not do that. I've heard people around here going, well, Peter Wagner teaches that. Well, go ahead and let Peter Wagner do that. I think he's deceased now, right? We are not to do that. In the Bible, it doesn't tell us to do that either. We're not told to fight in the heavenly realms. Go listen to the late John Paul Jackson. He said that too. So stay out of it. Okay, let's move on. Mike filibuster enough. Cosmology, Demonology. If you haven't got that book, go ahead and pick it up. You can get a field guide spiritual warfare.blogspot.com. It was interesting. I was doing my taxes and I was going through accounting stuff. And I didn't know if these sold or not, what was going on. And all of a sudden, I was trying to account for where expenditures went where. And I looked in on my bank accounts and there's these royalty payments for my books off the Kindle publishing. I go, where'd these come from? You know, so it was like, it wasn't a lot, you know, it was probably barely enough to take my wife now to go to the movies nowadays. It wasn't enough to take us to Disneyland and buy tickets. Nope. It was surprisingly, because for the longest time, it's been hard to see where the royalties are going, where they're coming in. But I think as you guys, listeners, have been listening to this and tuning in and picking it up, I would get Cosmology and Demonology, Genesis 1 through 11. It explains a lot. It's a very simple read, easy read. It's a primer on the World Council view that Michael Heiser talks about. And I think it's very impactful what's going on now. And I think it will disassemble and tear down a lot of things that the Apostolic Reform have been preaching, which is wrong. I always get my head bit off too. I mean, some people got mad at me today too, or the other day, because I went after a Catholic priest. I just don't go after the Catholic priest. I go after a lot of things I see the theology that's wrong, right? I stick to the Bible. If it's incoherent with the Bible, now I'm going after the, the Apostolic Reform. That's messed up too, man. So, is what it is. So go ahead and bite my head off. I don't care. I'm sticking to what Jesus says. Sticking to the Bible. If it's not peer-reviewed, you can't prove it's peer-reviewed, your answer, then don't come after me. If you enjoy the content, share the links with a friend or subscribe to us here. There should be a link here, or YouTube or something, or I don't know. There should be a subscribe button somewhere. If you'd like to bless the ministry, go to PayPal, and you could submit one through m16ministries@gmail.com through PayPal. We'd love to hear about that. We could always use the support. Like I said, I'm looking for stuff right now to go film. I think I might have a place next Wednesday I'm going to go to and take equipment, but I think I'm ready to roll to look for stuff. It's been a experiment learning equipment and getting ready and setting stuff up. So if I capture something, I don't want to mess it up. And that's probably more Holy Ghost story adventures, right? Holy Ghost adventures. That's what we're going to do. Look for some good stuff and not looking for the bad stuff. We don't care. So if you have a miracle that's interesting, that's going on right now that we record, whether it's in a hospital or something with a medical information and proof, or if you have stuff where routine angelic encounters are going on and there's proof. Like I said, we had the oil church sometime back here in San Francisco, and that's no longer happening, but there is physical manifestations going on. It was tangible, and my Bible, I have a Bible up there in the M16 HQ reliquary. That's an anointed Bible that manifested anointing oil. Cool stuff. So like I said, this is the Reverend Michael from the M16 Bishop, the M16 HQ, checking out. Now be a blessing, make good choices. Hope you enjoyed this walk through the book of Exodus and enlightened you and helps you understand what we didn't learn at the pulpit. No, it wasn't some other god they were fabricating. They weren't making some other god to dance around. Although they used occultic practices, and that's what they got in trouble for, to fabricate a likeness of God. It was supposed to be God, invisible God, because Moses disappeared. But until then, love you guys. This is Mike from the M16 HQ checking out. Amen. All right.